Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Julio Godinez, and welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar, 5 Don'ts for Supporting Developers with Cloud Resources, brought to you by Quali. We have a great webinar for you today, but before we get started, I need to go through some housekeeping announcements. Today's event is being recorded, so if you miss any part of the webinar, you will be able to watch it again. We will be sending out a link to access the webinar on demand, or you can visit DevOps.com/webinars, and it will be available for you as well. We are taking questions from the audience throughout the presentation. Use your webinar interface to submit questions into the Q&A section. We will try to get to as many as possible at the end. Finally, stick around until the end because we are doing a drawing for 4 $25 Amazon gift cards, so stay tuned to see if you're a winner. Joining me today is Alex Irizarry, Solutions Engineer, Quali, and Colin Fletcher, Product Strategy, also at Quali. I'm now going to put myself on mute, turn off my camera, and let you begin.
Thanks, Julio. And thanks to everybody out there. We really do appreciate you choosing to spend some time with us today to, as Julio mentioned, talk about 5 don'ts for supporting developers with cloud resources. Before we actually jump into those don'ts, however, let's take a moment to just lightly introduce ourselves. As Julio mentioned, I'm Colin Fletcher, and I help with guiding our product strategy here at Quali, and specifically for a product called Torque. Alex, do you mind just touching on what you cover here at Quali, if you can? Okay.
We can. It's fine.
Nope, but that's okay. We'll keep rolling. So I'll come back to you in a little bit, Alex. So thank you for that. So let's spend a few moments before we focus on the actual don'ts, talk about kind of why are we here and thinking about these challenges. And what it really boils down to is this growing realization and appreciation for the true cost of wasted time, and specifically wasted developer time. As many of you know, developer resources, developers themselves, development skills are in increasing demand, and nobody expects that to change anytime soon. And not only are those resources sometimes hard to find, hard to recruit, hard to deploy effectively, unfortunately, many of us have systems and processes that keep them from being as productive as possible. There's a growing body of research around this topic, and in particular, we're getting to places where we're getting more effective quantification of that actual impact, business impact of wasted developer time. In fact, our friends over at Garden recently published a survey focused on developer productivity and found that developers on average spend more than 15 hours every week. That's more than a quarter of a quote-unquote typical 40-hour work week, by the way. Over a quarter of their time doing anything other than writing and shipping code. Now, that's bad if you just think about it, right? If a quarter of your day is being effectively wasted on things that aren't what people want out of you, I mean, that's just not annoying. That's not just bad. That could be quite frustrating. But it also has a very real business impact, a very real quantifiable impact. In fact, in the study, they highlight that in the U.S. alone, that time equates to roughly 61 billion, that's billion with a B, dollars per year. That's just in the U.S. And I mean, when we get the data for a global perspective on that, it would only be worse. So that alone, I think, warrants spending some time figuring out how can we solve for this problem as it comes up over and over again. With that said, one of the things that we then looked at, because this is a common theme in our conversations with the market, with customers and with prospects all the time, looking to solve for this. In those conversations, we started to realize that there were some specific patterns, some specific themes, some specific ways about which people were going to solve for these problems in different ways that were leading them down effectively the wrong path. Unfortunately, a lot of that due to cultural situations, organizational challenges, literal decades of kind of conditioning on what different value propositions are. And so what we wanted to do was highlight some very specific areas where you could identify whether or not you're going down one of these wrong paths, going down one of these rabbit holes that may seem like they're going to solve for this problem, but they're really not. So we're going to touch on what those patterns are. Those are each of the don'ts. Then we're going to touch on each of some warning signs to know how do you know if you're on that path. And we talk about how do you pull yourself out of that? How would you do it differently? Because it's not particularly a great use of your time for us to just tell you all the things you're doing wrong if we're not able to point to something that helps you do it the right way, quote unquote. So with that, we'll jump into our first don't. So our first don't is, and all of these are requests because we actually want to have everyone do this better. Please don't design and deliver offerings. When you're talking about delivering infrastructure offerings, cloud offerings to support developers, don't deliver offerings that are so minimal in scope and characteristics that they meet literally any one person's needs, that they don't meet anyone's needs out of the box. You're probably on this wrong track if you've done all this work to put together a self-service, automated offering that you're able to deliver of cloud resources, yet you're still not seeing shorter delivery times, if you're not seeing a reduction in rework and or request volume, if you have yet to see this magic anticipated pool of staff time that suddenly shows up that can be reallocated because you've done all this work, if your requester satisfaction scores haven't changed, especially for the positive, or response rates to information hasn't changed even though you've done all this work, if you have a number of offerings that just don't ever seem to get picked, there's probably a reason for that. And lastly, if somebody just tells you that, if they just literally say, that's cool that you put this together, but I always need more than that. It's not really solving my problem. You need to be able to hear that feedback.
It's not working out,
Alex.
Yeah, it's not working out.
Yeah.
That's key right there, right? Typically, always, direct feedback, especially in the world that we now live in, right, in which speed and agility is the main thing out there. If we're doing stuff to so minimal in scope, right, that's not really going to help out. That's not going to really, from a developer's perspective, really speed up. Hopefully you can hear me just fine now, Colin.
Yes.
I'm on the backup of the internet, so hopefully we're good to go now.
No, absolutely. Thank you for working on that. It's great to have you aboard. I'll just say, like, this isn't just something that we think that we've experienced and see, because these could sometimes be touchy areas, but we literally had, in just the last month or so, a conversation with a very large financial services firm who has quite literally a published public success story, case study for one of the major public cloud service providers out there, that the whole theme of the story or the case study is how they have this fully automated, touchless, self-service delivery mechanism for delivering environments to developers on demand. Like, that is the thing, like, that they have this story around how amazing it is and how quickly it happens, right? Yet they were still reaching out to us to help. And our first question was, why? I mean, you've done all this work. You actually went out and said, hey, the problem's solved. And when we, peel back the onion in conversation, in short, the truth of it was that because of various processes, because of various requirements that they have, because of various cultural elements within the organization, the only thing that they could ever get anyone to agree on was an offering that was so limited that, yes, they could provision that in minutes in a self-service way, but they never solved for all of the manual steps and manual touches that required to actually get all the other pieces that were needed to actually make the thing functional, to actually make the developer productive. That would stretch it out so they could deliver this offering, this environment, in minutes. But the actual thing that would make the developer productive would still take days, weeks, sometimes months to deliver, which is, as the person agreed, was ridiculous. So what is one of the ways that you can address this very challenge? Well, it's to involve the developer up front, right? As you are designing and delivering the offering, make sure that you actually have direct input from the requesters themselves, the developers themselves. Get them involved in that process. Now, we understand, like with all of these things, it's much easier said than done. It can be very difficult to actually parse through what does someone actually need versus what do they think they need versus how do they describe the need. So you need to be prepared to utilize multiple feedback mechanisms in order to get that information. You also need to assume that you're going to need to evolve those offerings over time. So first time might not be it. Might need to make a few changes to make it really stick. The other part that may also be a bit challenging for some of us out there is to make sure that you are able to objectively and safely, very honestly, ask your teams, find out from your various development teams, what alternate resource paths are they following to meet their needs? If it's not coming through you, if people are going and getting resources directly from a public cloud provider, it's just as critical to understand, well, what are they doing, right, in order to get what they need in reality? Are they running Docker on their machine? Or do they have their own AWS account that they use for certain development cycles? Are they running their own CI jobs on their machine and using containers in order to kind of speed up their own work and then only working with your system when they have to? It's important to understand what the actual activity patterns are so that you can better describe what the need is and better change your offerings to kind of fit that need better.
Yeah. And I would add on the evolve comment that you said, Colin, that's key because, it's not like we're trying to change our mind every single time, right? The public cloud itself, right, hasn't been stagnant since it came out. That continues to evolve, right? And there's, solutions out there that continue to happen, right? From Terraform did one, Ansible, Chef, right? Pulumi.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I was mixing two different products, but they continue to come out, right? And it's that's why it's like, we do have to kind of evolve with the industry because the industry itself continues to evolve. It's not being stagnant.
That's the truth, right? On all sides of the equation, we've got demand changes on the demand side, changes on the supply side all the time, and it's just hard to keep up with it. That brings us to our second don't, and so the second don't is please don't provide a traditional infrastructure solution to a developer and or a DevOps problem. You're probably on this path, the wrong path. If developers are not directly, just like what we talked about, directly involved in the solution development, if specific applications or application types or platforms are not explicitly included in the solution definition, you're probably on the wrong track if the proposed solution's business value, if you get to that point where you're saying, if we build this and we make this available in a self-service context, it will have this impact on cost or growth or risk or something like that. If in that statement, you're not specifying the application as the vehicle through which those values or that value is being expressed or delivered, or at least one of the ways that it's doing it, you're probably on the wrong track. And lastly, if there's nothing in the value proposition associated with that offering that you've put together, that solution that explicitly improves the developer experience or developer productivity, you're probably on the wrong track. And I think, Alex, we were talking about one of those examples there. You ran straight into this.
Yeah, I definitely ran into this one straight up. And each solution to these type of don'ts, right? Organizations and enterprise will handle them differently. But in this specific example, this one caused an entire reorg in the company itself. That they pretty much took the entire developer team into the business, right? They tied it no longer to IT. They tied it to marketing. They tied it to finance. They tied it to this different groups because of the development team was trying to move at a speed that traditional infrastructure solutions were actually hindering from that. So management was like, hey, we're going to redo this. We're not going to go tackle it this way. We're going to get this entire team, this application team, and we're tying them to the business, right? Because the business is, at the end of the day, is just getting the input, right? The business is doing all the stuff that they want to grow. They want to grow the brand. They want to grow financials. They want to grow everything, right? And in order to do that, application delivery is key to that. But traditional infrastructure solutions tend to kind of slow the pace of where the business and how fast the business wants to move. And
in this solution, in that scenario, if I remember correctly, that was literally the deal. The problem got framed by business leaders within the business.
Yep.
That we had to increase velocity. We had to increase agility. We needed to deliver more applications and updates faster, period, right? To stay competitive, to keep pace with the market, to grow as an organization. And the answer that came out of the operations team or org or the IT organization was basically a full quote unquote infrastructure stack that wasn't particularly optimized for an application. It was defined by infrastructure values. It was kind of blind to development and application requirements. So yeah, it's pretty drastic when a reorg is the answer to that solution. When the solution becomes the next problem and the solution to that problem is a reorg, that's not great.
You definitely know you're on the wrong path at that point.
Yeah, and you probably have a different job now, in one way or the other. But anyway, the way to avoid that, right? If you find yourself on that path, is like what we mentioned before. Ensure that you have developers directly involved in solution definition. Make sure that business impact is defined in ways that include the application as the vehicle through which value will be realized. And ultimately, when possible, make sure there's a what's in it for me for developers in what you've put together, right? Cool. All right, on to don't number 3. Please don't assume that on-prem equals better governance and security. Now, I can feel people tightening up. I just can't. It's a magic capability of mine, even through the internet.
Yep.
But just don't make that assumption. You're probably making that assumption if you go back and you look at the last few, let's say 3 to 5 proposals, and you're consistently, at least initially, defining those solutions in an on-premise scenario, right? When you first design it, you just start from an on-premise perspective. You're probably on this track if you find that the delivery mode, deciding factor, the reason why you choose on-prem or something on public cloud or SaaS or hybrid is a governance and or security justification. If that's your deciding factor over that same pool of things, you might be on this path. You may be operating under this assumption. If no one on your team has directly been involved in designing or implementing a solution based on public cloud or SaaS or a truly hybrid solution in the past 18 months, you might be on this path and making this assumption. If it's been more than a year since you've seriously looked at how your peers or competitors are adopting public cloud-based solutions or SaaS-based solutions to solve similar business challenges, you could be on this path and making this assumption. The inverse of that is to mandate the exploration of a public cloud and or SaaS-based option when you're defining a potential solution. Right? It's important to actively investigate what your peers and competitors are doing. Things change, as we mentioned earlier. The rate of change is high, right? Something that was true or not true 18 to 24 months ago may be true now, right? It may have been solved one way or the other. It's also critical to continue to train and hire, just in general, upskill your team, right, with folks that do have that experience with it. So to make sure that you're not starting from a place based on what you feel comfortable with, as opposed to what's right for, the business challenge at hand.
Yeah. And I want to add into that one, right? We understand and we've seen them, right? There's always scenarios in which, that's going to be more an on-prem solution and stuff like that. The issue that we tend to see is that's starting foot. Necessarily, that doesn't have to be the starting foot every single time. And again, I can name a whole bunch of different solutions out there, SaaS-based and stuff like that do a really good job, that have a high valuation in the market because of what they're doing from the governance and from the security perspective. Helping organizations and enterprise in their strategy when we start talking about multiple clouds, right? Be on-prem or be public. So, and that's the thing right there, typically is being flexible to what's happening, right? Being flexible to how the market's moving. Because, again, like I said earlier, the market is moving and changing and adapting and evolving at a rapid pace.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. Like, the only thing that we're saying and recommending is that you do this, right? That you explore it, right? Not do it. An on-prem solution may be the right answer for whatever that business objective is. It absolutely may be. The trap that we're trying to help you pull yourself out of or avoid is just that pattern of just, if I always start in the same place, well, guess what? You're probably going to come up with the same answer every time, unless you inject something to kind of break that pattern. So it's all good. Don't number 4. All right. Now this one is probably something that you may or may not have at issue, but I think it's probably, we think it's probably still worth, keeping an eye on and re-examining. Please don't make requesting resources a multi-step and context process that goes outside of the developer tool set.
Yeah.
Right. This whole thing is about making developers more productive, more efficient, keeping the business of the developers with you, put it another way. And you may be on this track if your request workflow, with some easy ways to kind of test if this is happening. If your request workflow, the initial step, the first step to requesting resources for a developer starts anywhere other than where they are, which is usually an IDE or an integrated development environment, or via a command line interface, you're probably on the wrong track. If your request workflow requires manual human interactions as part of that process, absolutely requires it, you're probably on the wrong track. If your request workflow involves the developer having to use 2 or more interface types or tools just to get something, and in a usable state, you're probably on the wrong track. I think, Alex, this was another one where you were working with another large financial institution, and something, I believe they had like a siloed Azure and Terraform team.
Yeah, and that's exactly it, right? They had a team that was Azure and Terraform focused, and they were doing great within that concept, within that bubble. They were doing great. But the issue that they were encountering now that we're trying to expand it to the rest of the business, and it was large financial. We're talking about thousands and thousands of just developers. They were like, how do I now get what I've done here and expand it to more of a self-service, because not everybody knows what we've done, right? That's involving now multi steps for them, right, in this organization, to now try to get the rest, to come on board, the rest to start consuming this, and even there were like pieces of self-service, right? So they're trying to push out Terraform to do more pieces self-service. So these, the developers would have to go click here, do this, click here, do that, over here, and that was becoming a serious issue for their scaling, right? Again, because if it's a small window, small group of people, then yeah, you can work on it. But when you start scaling this problem, then that's where the issues come into play, and that's where we're trying to help them out. In my prior places, I was trying to help them think of the bigger picture, help them out, right? And how to go ahead and solve for this, but we kind of had to in a sense reverse engineer what they had already done to be able to help them be more fluid.
Right. In that situation, if I remember right, there were elements where they'd had parallel groups. So they had one centralized organization that had invested a lot of time and effort in putting together various self-service offerings within a certain platform and in support of certain kinds of infrastructure. And then at one point, however it worked out, there was a specific kind of fast-moving team.
Yep.
That was the quote-unquote cloud team or public cloud team. And that was much more kind of connected with developers and some modern applications and things running on that had developed their own kind of requirements and set of offerings. So they were this pocket, they were their own silo. So it was the reverse situation where there was a silo of the modern thing, yep. Right? So we're so used to each of the, even within traditional operations, different silos of different types of resources and expertise, that's required. Well, this was effectively a DevOps engineering practice that had built something around Azure and Terraform that was great for those kinds of applications. But how they had built that and how they had designed that offering for supporting a very specific set of requirements, a very specific team, just wasn't translating. It wasn't obvious how that was going to plug into the rest of the self-service capabilities. And so there was always this artificial step that even if somebody needed that latest and greatest style of environment, they still had to go through one process And then there was this kind of choose your own adventure piece that would then drop them into this other team workflow, whether or not it applied. And then they spent time figuring out whether or not that made sense. And then and only then would it keep moving and someone would actually get something.
Mm-hmm.
So it created this like speed bump.
Yep. The request workflow itself for this specific example got pretty complicated, right? Once it got out of that pocket, that workflow, like you said, right, there was quite a bit of speed bumps that happened throughout the way. And, all that did was just delay the process.
Yeah. And unfortunately, everyone feels it, but the person most impacted effectively is the person who's requesting the resource because they need it, right? They're not asking for it just because they just want to ask for something. They want it to be able to do their job. So how do we avoid that, right? How do we move past that? Well, we make sure that we design workflows that actually can be completely automated and accessible or usable via developer user experiences or user interfaces of choice. Right? We design the workflow to meet the developer where they are, which is, as mentioned earlier, the IDE or the CLI.
Yep.
We need to design that workflow as a completely automated end-to-end process. When absolutely possible, we need to make sure that any human interaction steps are actually exceptions and handled on an exception basis. If they're not, if your exceptions are 50% of the time, that's not an exception, right? And so we need to go back and relook at our workflow that we have and maybe the offering itself. And the same thing from an experience perspective, we want to make sure that we keep interface and context switching to an absolute minimum. You just shouldn't have to bounce between different interfaces that describe different things differently just to get something, right? When we know that alternatives, particularly direct to developers themselves via public cloud service providers and others, are pretty cut and dry. They don't force you down, that kind of thing. That's what we're working kind of against. Cool. Now on to number 5, magic number 5. Number 5, please don't add, and sorry, let me move the slide. Please don't add manual cost and governance steps to the resource request itself. Now, if I thought we were getting a little tight and a little, I don't know, earlier, this one I know is gonna have some folks kind of shaking their heads and wondering what's happening and what's in the air in Texas. Well, I'll leave that. Let that one lie. Anyway, you're probably on this wrong track if you have steps in your workflow that absolutely force a cost review, a justification, a governance requirement definition, a preemptive individual responsibility acknowledgement before anything happens, right? Yeah. Or gets delivered. You're probably on this wrong track if you are asking questions that the requester, in this case a developer, likely doesn't have the answer to, just to move the thing forward. And seriously look at what those elements are. If you're asking someone questions that for certain data or to affirm certain things, you need to ask yourself, how would that person know those things, right? Is that part of their typical kind of job, right? To really get in their kind of position. And lastly, if you have a high abandon rate or a rising number of incomplete requests that fail progression at this stage, you are probably on this path. Yeah. Alex, I think I see this all the time. I don't know.
I can't tell you how many RFPs I have filled out in which one of the questions is, do you do, cost comparison before? And I'm like, I mean, obviously we answer it, right? But it's like,
sure.
what's the point? You know,
Yeah.
I get it. I get it. You want the person to see what's going to cost, right? What are the options, right, and stuff like that. But if I have a specific project, right, if I'm testing something that I need to go and I need to, go ahead and do it quick, right, I'm not going to stop and see, all right, which option do I want to go with, right? Because I have a story, I have a task that I need to complete, for the sake of this, massive delivery that we're doing, for the sake of providing additional business value, right, with this new enhancement that we're pushing out to the product itself. I'm not going to stop, right? So adding that step and be like, hey, wait a minute, you need to add information as to why this is, what's the value, what's the purpose, what are you doing? At that point, it's like, it just becomes an endless cycle. And, the business itself is the one that suffers at that point, because, we're not able to provide the value that we really want to provide. Like, hey, I got this awesome thing that I want to show. This is how it's going to help out the business. It's going to decrease this amount of time. It's going to drive user experience from their perspective of, they're going to see this pop up and stuff like that. But I can't really test that out, because they're telling me that, hey, you need to provide why this is, the business value for the cost on this to do a test, right? It's not even to push it to production. It's just to do a test.
Yeah.
I can't tell you. I mean, it's one of those that it's just, again, it's all part of the automating the entire process itself, right?
Yeah, no, it is, and that's why from a how should you? So you're the natural question is, well, if we're not doing that, what are we doing, right? Because we still have, we being various operations groups, anyone responsible for kind of managing the cost, the security, and the governance posture of these resources for the organization. We have a fiduciary duty. We have a responsibility to the business to make sure that we're not just going willy-nilly.
Yep.
Well, the answer is to turn the problem on its head, right? Right. Make sure, instead of forcing and investing a lot of time in asking the requesters questions that they will likely not have the answer to, and or just as importantly, you actually might already know the answer to from different sources, like role definitions. So an example is, why would you require a developer to tell you what applications, what the importance of whatever application that they're developing, if you already know by role definition that this developer is part of this team that is building and supporting our primary B2C e-commerce platform application? Why do you need the developer to repeat that to you? If you know that's critical to your organization because that's how you generate revenue, then you shouldn't be asking that. You should know that, right? That should be part of role definition, understanding, who that person is and why they're using it, in order to provide the right things up front, right? So if you spend time just focus on delivering the resources and delivering the right resources, then you'll find that you don't need to ask these questions because you've embedded that into the solution definition itself. The reason why you're having to do all these other checks and ask all these questions is because you're taking the approach of saying, well, I don't know what this is for. You can't afford to not know that at this point, and you're not knowing that is part of what's getting in the way of developer productivity. So the better approach is to invest the time in building out and designing the right things that, from an offering perspective, investing the time to bake in automated cost and governance management capabilities within the offering and the tools that you're using to provide these resources, so that the requester doesn't have to know. You're just providing them with what they have, but you have the means of having complete visibility as to what is being requested, what's being delivered, what's actually being utilized, and what is it? How is it configured and running?
Yep.
Like if you have those things, then that answers most of those questions for you. In the meantime, the person has the thing to do it. That you should be using, right? The opportunity to analyze the information from those capabilities on an ongoing basis and spend that effort in tuning the policies that help you offer the right thing, as opposed to the policies that enforce certain activities. The policy should be offering the right thing, which is what you're trying to design. And the last thing is, right, there are solutions, including ours, that actually embed this from the get, right? Automatically categorize the information, get it into the process so that you can actually do all of this and evolve the activities. But what you're doing is you're removing this artificial information gathering step that you can gather in different ways, and that removes friction from actually getting developers what they need in a timely fashion.
And that last point, right? That's key, right? I think when you start adding, in my experience, cost beforehand, governance beforehand, right? It's because something went away, something was missed, right? Yep. And in order for something not to be missed again, hey, we're going to add these manual steps into that, right? So, how do you solve for that problem? First of all, like you said, our tutorial, we automatically tag everything right there. That way, in the back end, in the public cloud, you can generate the information, you can generate the report to see, all right, this is, this costs this costs this costs this, and able to start backtracking, start getting more information to, from what's being actually delivered. And the other thing is there's automation in place, right? Even with our tool, right? To go ahead and after hours, weeks, or days, right? Depending on how long the project is going, automatically just go ahead and shut off, right? Do a destroy of everything, right? Because the speed is already there to spin something up, to do it quickly. So you're not having to worry about next time, hey, I need to spin this up again, right? Hey, it's already there. The automation's in place. We can spin it up quickly. So at the same time, right, if we can spin it up quickly, then I don't have to keep it running forever, right? And that comes now into destroying it, in a time basis.
Yeah, I mean that those are all qualities of kind of what is the right thing, right? Yep. So the right thing or right offering is something that's available for as long as it needs to be, right? To serve whatever that purpose is, that you'll have an understanding of, that it actually does deliver on the capabilities requested and needed. That one of the right things, frankly, is that you or anyone is getting this information that you need to manage these resources appropriately. If you're not getting that information and you're having to ask this on a repeated basis, well, then that's not the right thing. It's not the right way to handle it, because you shouldn't be having to do that manual work either, because there are ways of getting that information in an automated fashion and managing those resources in an automated way. At the end of the day, everyone is happier when you're able to do this. This is also not something, this is yet another thing that isn't just super easy, right? This is all about kind of inverting the effort of work around getting resources to developers in the upfront stuff, right? Actually spending time making sure that you're meeting the demands of folks, of your developer requesters, that if you invest more time in doing that, or as much or more time in doing that, getting that right, then the automation part of it, the actual delivery part of it, is that much simpler. Yeah. So is the ongoing management of it. And I think that's really, when you think about the commonality thing that brings all of these don'ts together, it really comes from a reminder to make sure that you are looking at developers, the development teams, and DevOps teams from the right perspective, which is that of a customer. They're as much of a customer as anyone else in your organization. Even if they are technically part of an IT organization in your situation, they're still a customer. And customers have choice. Customers are always right, even when we don't like that. And I know some people will not agree with that, but customers will also define what they need in their own ways, and those needs change over time, just like what you have to satisfy those requirements changes all the time. It's an important thing to keep in mind. Keep in mind that that is your starting point, right? If you're starting from the customer viewpoint as opposed to what do you have to offer or what do you think you have to offer, then you're on the right track. Alex, does that resonate with you?
Absolutely. I was just, when you were talking about that, I was thinking about an example way back in which there was an IT shop, and there was a website that we were maintaining, and we weren't moving too quick. So marketing came in and said, you know what, guys, don't worry about it. We got budget. We're taking care of our the website. Thank you, but no thank you. In other words, right? And that's because in that sense, right, we weren't treating marketing right as the customer, right? And they took matters into their own hands, right? And that's the same thing. That's why, don't forget, definitely developers are your customers, so treat them that way, right? That's the thing that we really are trying to drive home, because what tends to happen is like, here comes another request.
Right.
And that's not the goal, right? In general, that's not the goal of DevOps in general, right? It's just more of a, how do we really move together, right? The business, right? It always comes down to that.
Yeah, it's we say all of this with the understanding that we're all pulled in so many directions,
Yep.
and in this case, like, we have so many customers, right, to help with. We have so many responsibilities that pull us in so many directions. It's just too easy to lose sight of this kind of mindset, of this focus, of this kind of approach to solving for these challenges, because it's just hard work. It just really is. There's no way around that. But I think together we can always improve. There's always baby steps to do this. You should think about these different, don'ts as and approaches as a thought exercise. It's just a toolkit to help you in your process, right? If you avoid one of these pitfalls, one of these traps once, well, that's going to help, right, in the long run. It's not the kind of thing that you have to look at solving for in its totality, immediately. It's something that you could work to build in, help shape everyone's perspectives to get everybody on the right track. So I think that's all of the kind of presentation material. Julio, do we have some questions queued up?
Sorry about that. Yes, we do have some questions, and before we get into them, just as a reminder that you can submit questions by going over to the Q&A tab. Question number 1. So when you are mandating the exploration of public cloud and/or SaaS-based options and solution definitions, are you implying that on-prem solutions should not be considered as equivalent options?
Thank you for that. So the answer is no, not at all. Quite the contrary. All we are recommending and trying to help everybody consider doing is injecting this type of step to actually help ask the question each time, to make sure that you're actually staying up to date on current capabilities and approaches, right? That's all we're trying to help you kind of build that tool in, to question at the right time. Do I actually know the answer to this? Am I actually asking the question that's there, instead of working off of what may have been the right answer at a particular point in time? So, yeah, sometimes on-prem solutions equivalent or sometimes better, depending on what the requirements are and what the need is. But yeah, Alex, I think you popping in.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I agree 100% what you're saying, Colin. Typically, what I've seen is uh, most of the time, some of those solutions tend to hinder the speed, right? When we're talking about traditional infrastructure, solutions to a DevOps problems, tend to hinder it, right? But that's not being said. That's going to be the case every single time, right? Again, it comes down to being more flexible, right? Meeting again your customer where they're at that point, having a conversation on how we can tackle this problem together.
Totally. Cool. Any other questions?
Yes. Let's see here. What should I do if I don't think our current tooling can work in this direct to developer way?
Yeah, I know there's probably many of you out there that are in that situation of like, yeah, well, that's cool that y'all are talking about these things, and that would be nice, but that's just not what's in our toolbox today, and I'm not sure when to do that. I think the most practical thing to do in those circumstances is to go test those assumptions, even because even solutions that you have may have evolved, since the last time that you've done an evaluation of them. But I think the best starting place is similar to injecting the question of, is there a public cloud or SaaS-based way to solve for something? Similarly, you should start incorporating a definition of a direct-to-developer set of requirements in your requirements when you're looking at the next solution that's related. So if you're looking at another automation tool, or if you're looking at your next service management tool, if you're looking at your next set of cloud management capabilities or infrastructure automation type tooling in some way, just make sure that you've actually got something that sets those kinds of capabilities as something that you're going to look for and or require as part of a solution definition. Secondarily, it's always worth having a fresh conversation with your tooling vendors to see if this is something that they have solved for, and just maybe you haven't had a chance to hear about it yet, or have a plan to do so, because many do in response to these needs. Lastly, it might be time to look for a new tool, but I think there's things that you can do before then. Alex, does that make sense to you too?
Yeah, 100%. Right. I was going to say conversation, right? Those, not just right in conversation, with the vendor and the toolings and all this stuff, but conversation internally, right? Because again, in these organizations and these companies, right, you would hope that everybody that works for that company or that enterprise, right, have a common goal. And that common goal is to continue to move the business forward. How can I do my job, my part to move the business forward, right? And if you're hitting roadblocks at that point, then yeah, those typically, what I was saying, that's kind of red flaggish at that point. But most of the time, it's not going to be the case, right? That's why I say conversation, and you never know. You don't know what doors will open at that point.
Totally. Cool.
All right. Next, we have how would I know if we're asking the questions that the requester can't answer? Shouldn't they be able to justify what they need?
Yeah, I mean, yes, it's a good question. So, of course, the requester, to a point, should be able to describe what they need. But you need to ask yourself, as mentioned before, if you're asking a question that you probably can get a faster, more concrete answer to yourself, then why put that burden on the requester to put that information in? As described, that sometimes means relooking at role definition, sometimes how you have your identity and access management configured to understand that. It may be that the real answer to that is, hey, we don't have everyone's information in our employee profile files up to date, right? That would give us those kind of clues and perspectives that we then don't have to ask. There's a lot of ways to solve for the problems of information gathering to make sure that you are presenting both designing, delivering, and presenting the quote unquote right type of offerings to the right person. If so, you need to be looking at those and instead of just taking the short path, which is, well, let me just ask that person, right? Because yes, that person likely does have a better perspective or perhaps a concrete perspective on what a particular requirement is. But to Alex's earlier point, if the developer is just needing to do some testing offline, pre-production on a system, that's just part of application development. Like that's saving time and rework and operational issues, outages, etc. down the line if they can just do that, as quickly as possible. So it's in the nature of their work. So it's better spent, the time figuring out, removing as many questions as possible from that workflow.
And I would add that, sometimes they will have a solution to their problem locally to them, right?
Mm-hmm.
They've already figured out how to solve it and, pass the roadblock that they've had for them. Now they're just trying to figure out, how do I pass this roadblock to be able to now, show you what I'm doing, right, in your environment, right, in the environment that we would hope they would be working in. But if they're hitting those roadblocks, then they have something locally. And that begs the conversation at that point, like, all right, so how are you doing this now, right? And it's not more like, oh, you're not supposed to be doing that and stuff like that. Those are conversations that can happen later on, but it's a step. It's a stepping stone to how to solve, right, to get that information, to get how they're currently solving for it.
Totally. I think there was one other question, and we'd be happy to answer that.
Yes, I think this was in regards to do number 3. So is the business taking over the IT interface and compliance requirements?
So I don't know that I would totally say, to provide a global answer to that in widespread, but yes, I would say that the customer, in this case, the business stakeholder, may be a product owner, it may be someone who is in charge of a line of business, it's the application owner and or the developers. If they're not setting or playing a more or setting these different requirements to achieve business objectives, they are much more involved in defining what those things are and or are exploring any number of options for getting those needs met. So I think you can look at the growth of public cloud service providers over the last decade. I think you can look at the explosion of applications and services that have been developed and delivered, many of which are probably on your phone. Many of the services that you enjoy today are in large part, particularly the more interesting and exciting ones, and ones that have the most growth associated with them, are ones where these kinds of questions and these kinds of approaches were how those solutions came to be.
Yep.
With direct understanding of how those services, applications, and the resources running them actually deliver or impact business results directly, right? The person that's going to do that's going to stand up and say, hey, we should go enter this market because we think our video platform or our dog food bowls or whatever are going to be a big hit based on research we did in this new region. The person that's going to stand up and build that business case is someone who will be the business stakeholder and the product owner. Therefore, what the solution that helps to drive that towards that objective, they're increasingly involved in what the technical solutions are to that, the digital solutions are to actually making that happen.
Yeah, 100%, right? I would say, like, you have this massive, this big circle of business case, right? This is our business case, right? So from all angles, we start talking, right, all right, this is the solution to that business case. This is the solution to that business case. Typically what happens is this is a problem to the business case, right? And these were these speed bumps and these roadblocks come into play, right? So that's why we started talking about, especially around that point, right? Just bring a solution, right, to the overall business case, right? It's not that business is taking over the IT interface or compliance requirements, right? Because there's specific skill sets, right? There's people that know that aspect, right? That know that really well. It's just bringing the solution to the business case. There's going to be scenarios to what Colin said that I agree 100%. But again, that's the main point that I would say.
Yeah, I mean, I think the different way of looking at it, the customer centric way of looking at it, is to say the requirements were always their requirements.
Yep.
Right. If they're in charge of the business results around revenue, cost, or risk, then their requirements were always the requirements. Mm-hmm. Were they the ones that were defining them to how they actually get implemented? Maybe, maybe not. But increasingly, they're being involved in that. But the ultimate responsibility for serving the mission, for generating those business results, all roll back to that that kind of responsibility. But I think with that, I think we're out of time. But I really want to thank you, Alex, for joining us, and Julio for your help today, and to everyone attending and asking great questions. We do hope to keep the conversation going. Really appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Julio. Thank you, Colin.
Thank you all very much. Just a reminder that today's webinar has been recorded. So if you missed any or all of the webinar, you will be able to watch it again. We will be sending an email link with access to the webinar on demand. The webinar will also be available on devops.com. Look in the on-demand section in the webinars page, and it should be there. Quickly, our 4 Amazon gift card winners today are Lauren D., Sean F., Francis M., and Barris G. So congratulations to our winner. We'll be reaching out to you via email with instructions for claiming your Amazon gift card. So please check your inbox. And if you don't see it there, check your spam folder. Thanks again to Alex and Colin for an excellent webinar. And thank you to the audience for joining us. This is Julio Godinez signing off until next time. Be well.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Thank you.